Okay, let's get started here. Um, Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our next episode of Executive Edge. Executive Edge is a speaker series sponsored by the Office of Executive Education at the University of Georgia Terry College of Business, featuring discussions with corporate thought leaders and UGA faculty, offering in-depth previews of our professional development programs and faculty expertise. I'll be hosting these discussions via LinkedIn Live on the UGA Executive Education page at noon on select Wednesdays throughout the year. My name is Jason Parrish. I'm the Associate Director of Learning Solutions here at the Terry Executive Education Center in Atlanta. And for today's discussion, we plan to highlight our Strategic Decision Making and Crisis Management program. This program is currently offered in a blended format of online asynchronous coursework blended with 3 live virtual sessions over the course of a week. The great thing about this format is that it allows you the flexibility to complete the coursework on your own time while also giving you live access to our expert faculty. So speaking of, please allow me to introduce today, our speaker for today, our UGA faculty instructor for this course, Dr. Mike Farr. Dr. Farr is the Associate Dean for Research and Executive Programs and a Distinguished Chair of Business Administration at the Terry College of Business. He's done quite a bit of research in the areas of strategic decision making and crisis management, and he actively teaches this topic to our professional and executive MBAs, as well as to a wide variety of our corporate partners at the Executive Education Center here in Atlanta. So without further ado, Mike, I'll give you the floor and we'll get the presentation started.
Great. Thanks so much, Jason. And thanks everyone for joining us here today. It is really a pleasure to talk with you all. Please, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, or if you're willing, to jump right in, that's fine too. We want to make this as interactive as possible for you. As Jason said, I have taught in our Atlanta-based MBA programs and in executive education for over a dozen years. And I often teach on these subjects that we're going to talk about today. So, just to give a little bit of background on me, if we could go to the next slide.
All right, Mike, give me just a second. I'm
Sure
sorry.
thing. Sorry about that.
Let's see here.
Just to foreshadow some of the things while Jason and I get this going about the things I'm going to talk about today, I really want to talk about 4 related dimensions of topics that I do in executive education and also in our Atlanta-based MBA program. So the first one, as Jason mentioned, is really on critical thinking and strategic decision making. The second one has to do with what I call corporate communication and crisis management. A third area that fits naturally into these 2 areas are ideas of decision making around corporate ethics. And then the fourth one is what we call traditional strategic decision making, like the make or buy decision, or whether we merge or acquire different things. So again, please be as interactive as you wish. I'm happy to deal with your questions. I don't want this to be a presentation that's totally one way. So if something doesn't make sense, feel free to jump in, or if you have some insights to share, we're happy to hear it. So just a quick bio of me. You see my degrees there in the pictures. So I got my undergraduate degree from Notre Dame. I worked as a graduate assistant baseball coach at the University of North Alabama, where I got my MBA at night. So I'm very familiar with folks getting their MBAs at night and appreciate the hard work that they do during the day. I got my PhD at the University of Maryland. And as I said, I've been at Georgia here since 2009, and my home department is management. I've been an associate in the associate dean's role for the last, this is my 3rd year, but I continue to teach actively in our MBA programs as well as our PhD program. And I continue to do active research in these areas, so strategic decision-making, corporate communications, and crisis management. I also do a lot of work on corporate reputation and celebrity. So what that means is if firms are in the news a lot, the trade-offs associated with how they manage negative events, how they manage crises, the decision to be more of a media darling and the trade-offs associated with that. And then also I do have, before I went back and got my PhD, I did work for about 10 years as an investment consultant and also as a small business director. So it's great when I teach in Atlanta to teach working professionals, as I always like to say, the wisdom's in the room when I teach these folks, and I can relate to their industry experience. But of course, they bring the cutting edge ideas to the table in all the courses that I teach. So let's talk about the first module here, or the four different dimensions of the programs that I offer in executive ed. And they also show up in the modules or the courses that I teach in the MBA programs. So this first one is this notion of critical thinking and decision making, and we'll start with that. Then, as I mentioned, corporate communication and crisis management, we'll spend a couple minutes on that. And then we'll finish up with some things that I do around ethics and strategic decision making. So if we move on to the first one, what is critical thinking and decision making? When I teach this to executives and also to my MBAs, we look at exploring the strategic decision making processes. We understand the roles of uncertainty and biases, and we evaluate this notion of rational versus non-rational decision making. What we really want to do, and we have some fun with it, is really expose that we as humans all have biases, right? That we all have non-rational ways of looking at things. And so on the next slide, I give you some examples of the things that we talk about. So that I know there's a lot of information here, but if we talk about the availability bias, what I really want to do when I get into these biases is how they play out at work. So availability bias really shows up every day. And when we watch the news or read the newspaper or go on social media, we get a lot of outlying information that we cognitively, and it's the way we're hardwired, generalize. So we think, for example, like a lot more negative events happen than really happen in real life. And so the key is at work, we go into how can we handle the availability bias at work? How can we handle the representative bias at work? And so I like to talk about, there's a lot of what I call airport books, right? Like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. We know on one hand that these books have isolated some habits that people have. But when we get into critical thinking, we also know there could be people with these habits that aren't successful, and there can be people without these habits that are successful. And so where this comes to play at work is when we check ourselves on drawing conclusions immediately from people's resumes or how they appear or how they talk in hiring decisions. Confirmation bias is also a very big one when we make strategic decisions, right? We look for data that confirm what we want to find out. And so a key takeaway in many of the things that we do in these programs, in executive education and in the MBA programs, is that I'm not giving you answers to these questions. Strategic decisions in general are, as I like to say, fraught with peril. There's rarely one right answer. But what we're doing is exposing things that could alter our decision making and working on mechanisms within the organization to check things like confirmation bias. Do you assign a devil's advocate for these large strategic decisions? Is this person allowed to say, hey, well, what about, and things of that nature? And so if we could go back to the previous slide really quick. And so other ones including that show up at work are anchoring bias, which comes up in negotiations and in selling. Are we trying to lead in how we frame things? It's important in how we talk with clients and potential customers on how we frame things. And then, some of these ones that are a little bit more interesting or a little bit more intriguing are the fundamental attribution error. And so I always joke that when companies make earnings, the CEO takes all the credit, right? Because it was all about the company and the CEO. And then when organizations miss earnings, it's all about the weather or the economy, or it's someone else's fault, right? And so then if we move to the next slide, just to talk about a couple more things that I think are very pertinent at work. Sunk cost bias is an amazing thing. So there's a trade-off here in the sense that companies become successful because they're good at things. I mean, Kodak was really good at developing film. Even though they developed the technology for the digital camera, they shoved it down because they didn't want to cannibalize their own business. However, if we continue doing what we always do, this idea of the status quo bias, we can miss out on innovations. We can be taken over by other companies who are more nimble and innovative than we are. And this idea of sunk cost goes into our reward for people who have stick-to-itiveness and work really hard. And so we have to be able to check that if we continue to invest in a losing proposition, are we allowed to stop? And so the adage associated with that is, if you walk into a movie and you've already paid for it and you don't like the movie, you should allow yourself to walk out. Whereas a lot of people say, well, I've paid for it, I should sit through it. In business, that's more important, because whereas taking risks can and should be rewarded to a certain degree, sticking to things that continue to be losing propositions aren't always the best idea. And the key here is, how can we put parameters in place in our organizations to deal with this? Other things that are really important to talk about at work are this notion of groupthink. So on one hand, companies like to create positive cultures. We are a family. The downside to that is, being a family may often suppress people's desire to speak up against the norms. And so how can companies handle that? And then finally, this idea of the jerk factor. There's some other ones listed here, but this idea of the jerk factor is that we tend to promote biases that good leaders should be jerks, that if you're nice, you're too soft, or you're easily overrun and things like that nature. How can we get around certain biases or stereotypes even on what makes effective leadership? So those are some of the things that we do in exec ed, and talking about different biases. We watch some video. I even give us a little quiz, of which I'll show example of here in the next couple slides. So for example, when we're talking about the availability bias, one of the questions I like to ask, which of the following causes more deaths in the United States each year? Is it shark attacks, or is it vending machines? Now, if you think strongly about this and why I'm asking the question, you may come up with the right answer, which is vending machines. But however, we hear a lot more about shark attacks than we do about vending machines. And in fact, is what will show up here on the next slide, is that most people guess shark attacks, even though death by vending machines occurs 4 times more frequently. In fact, fun fact, more people are killed by champagne corks and selfies than they are by shark attacks in a given year. So as we continue on the slide, this is an example of the availability bias. So we're prone to the availability bias simply by the news that we consume. And I know we all intuitively know this, but if we take that into the workplace, what are the mechanisms that we can have in place to help us not be basically over-seduced? It's the wrong word, but that we believe that these things happen a lot more than they really do. And one of the functions of the media, whether you ascribe to the fact that the media is inherently biased or not, even if you ascribe to the fact that they aren't, the media focus on vivid and salient and outlying events to bring our attention to them. The challenge is that we see these salient events and we assume that they happen all the time, and we're all prone to those biases. Another example on the next slide is this idea of the overconfidence bias. So how would you rate your driving skills? So as we scroll through the slide here, 93% of people consider themselves above average. As I like to joke with all my driving back and forth to Atlanta, that those people must not drive on 316, right, to Athens and back, because there are a lot of people that I would consider below average, but of course I consider myself above average. And so this is this overconfidence bias, this late woebegone effect where everyone is above average. See some more stats there. 68% of professors rate themselves in the top 25%. 87% of students rate themselves above average. But more importantly, these fun kind of facts that we chuckle at, overconfidence is a huge part of leadership, among many leaders in companies. We want people to be confident. But what's this notion of being overconfident, and how can we deal with it? Because overconfidence can lead to increased risk-taking, doing things that don't make sense. It can lead to the sunk cost bias, where, hey, we've invested in this project where we continue to lose, and things of that nature. So this, again, this notion of the overconfidence bias, placing too much faith in your knowledge and abilities. But the key is leading to risk-taking, discounting others' opinions, so it can lead to the confirmation bias, and also underestimating how long a task will take. So again, the key to our sessions is talking through with your experiences at work, again, the wisdom's in the room. I'll ask you, what sort of things do you have in place at your organization to deal with this? And if you don't, excuse me, if you don't, what do you suggest would be good mechanisms for that? And finally, rounding out this decision-making modular program, I'll have you read some topical articles from the popular press, and to help us really contextualize these biases. And so one I often have you read is this idea of Bernie Madoff. And we talk about, why was Madoff so successful? And it was things like, he promised you modest gains, right? He didn't promise you the moon. And so no one really thought through, how is he beating the market just a little bit all the time? But a big thing that was part of that was many of his clients went to the same country club he did. Many of his same clients went to the same synagogue that he did, and also attended different, cultural events in New York City with him. And so there's this idea of identification, right? Is that, wow, Bernie's one of us, so he can't be bad for us. So this idea of identification and tribalism play big roles in our choices of the people that we hire and the people that we work with. And so this is a good way to spur discussion and bring it into the workplace. A second modular program that fits in nicely, that segues nicely with the critical thinking and decision making, brings in a lot of the research that I do on corporate communications and crisis management. And so some of the goals of these programs that we look at the crisis management process. Again, I want to be clear, crisis is a strong word, but what we really talk about in these programs is that if a negative event happens either within the organization or something that reaches external stakeholders, how do firms communicate how they're handling this, and also the trade-offs associated with, overly apologizing, not saying anything, being deflective or scapegoating other people. So we get into, again, the different trade-offs of how you communicate externally these types of negative events. And so the next slide I put up just to be kind of funny, to show that crisis management is inherently very messy. I mean, it's the world's worst slide on purpose. All these different things go into account, right? And so if we go to the next slide, I distill it down to what I call 5 things, right? So there's 5 things to consider when you're managing a negative event or an issue. And we bring in a lot of examples, a lot of mini cases, a lot of vignettes that talk about internal processes. So whether it's sexual harassment allegations inside the organization, or you work for a cruise line and your ship is listing off in the Mediterranean Sea, how you handle these sort of things. And of course, we then try to apply it to the issues that face your organization. So the first thing is issue type. What kind of crisis is it? What's its level of severity? And I put severity in quotes because in 2020 or in the 21st century, severity's taken on a different role in things that go viral, right? And so traditionally, when United had the crisis of dragging the doctor off the plane, whereas that's a terrible event, traditionally that wouldn't have made as much news as it did. So managers such as yourselves have to spend more time trying to calculate, what's the calculus of how severe something is going to become. The second thing to consider is how firms respond. And again, I talk incessantly about trade-offs, right? So timing is really important. If you come out fast, you can control the narrative, but you might not have all the information. If you come out more slowly, the narrative can be controlled by someone else, right? Because nature abhors a vacuum, but you're getting in more information. You're marshaling resources. And then I've seen in real time in my research and simply just being a consumer of business news is that reticence or silence is making a comeback. I mean, back in the old days, firms wouldn't say anything. And we're seeing that again because the calculus is, I mean, rightly or wrongly, is that this negative event will be replaced by something else in a 24-hour news cycle. But in general, the talking heads like me and consultants will tell you firms should show remorse. They should take responsibility. They should offer recompense, and they should show how they're rehabilitating right after this negative event. So actions and words. The trade-offs always are that if you do this, again, in general, all crises are samples of one, so to speak. If you do this in general, you can normalize the loss, right? Crises are loss events, loss of reputation, stock loss, financial loss, and potentially human loss in some form. And so typically we as humans treat organizations as humans as well. So we want you to express an apology, right? But a corporate apology you have to be careful in terms of liability. We understand that. You should accept responsibility. I talk a lot about the trade-offs of not doing these things. If you stay silent, if you tend to deflect things. And so on one hand, if you do these things, you're going to take a loss, you normalize it, and you can move on. If you don't do these things, the trade-off is, one, you can get away with it, or two, if you're caught doing it, human nature is to punish you a little bit more. The other three things to consider is the type of, what kind of firm is it? Does it have a good reputation? Is it really well known? Is it in the media, right? Is it a B2C company, or is it more of a B2B or a B2G company? Reputation's a funny thing. On the one hand, a highly reputable firm, like say a Starbucks, can get the benefit of the doubt for small transgressions. Oh, it's a blip on the radar, right? That's what our brain says. But when something big happens, more attention is drawn to this firm because they're held to a higher standard, right? Stakeholder characteristics. How do you respond to your investors versus the public, versus the community in which you operate? And then again, this catch-all category of the industry that you're in. Are you in a dirty industry? Are you often guilty by association? Things of that nature. And of course, always the role of social media in this process in 2021. Another part of the issue management in the corporate communications segment is that we get into some very provocative things, right? And so more and more, at least a section of stakeholders or portions of stakeholders are demanding that organizations continue to act more like humans and take stances on things. And so we go to a lot of examples like Delta in recent years, like Starbucks, like Nike, and we talk about the strategic trade-offs associated with this. Should your company take a stance on social and cultural issues? What's the positives for doing so? And we talk about strategically, companies like Delta, Starbucks, and Nike are publicly traded companies. They're for-profit companies. So on some level, the CEOs and top managers who do these things are assuming that if they take this stance, that it will be a net positive for the company. But again, like all strategic decisions, it's fraught with peril in the sense that they don't know for sure. So these are discussions that all organizations need to have, and the value of doing this, whether it's because it's the right thing, whether because your stakeholders demand it, and whether because you think it is beneficial to the company, all come into account. And so the last dimension of the programs that I offer is this more strategic management. So I could have started with this in a way because this is a general overview of firms making strategic decisions. So definitionally, a strategy is an action managers take to achieve competitive advantage. So this idea of looking at your opportunities and threats, that's the OT there, and matching them up with your strengths and being aware of your weaknesses. And then the goal is to have competitive advantage. So it's just a nerdy way of saying of outperforming other firms. And then we get into more details depending on, and we'll tailor make it to your company. If your company's involved in a merger and acquisition or something like that, we can go through this process. So in the next slide, I kind of break it down in a little bit more detail. So when we talk about strategic decision making, just like I gave you the 5 things for crisis management, this is a back of the envelope index card way to compartmentalize, to categorize the strategic decision making process. So the first thing is strategic analysis, and this is looking at opportunities and threats. And many of you have heard these things. They are back of the envelope without question, but they're good organizing mnemonics and tactics to see what are those opportunities and threats out there. So 5 forces looks at industry characteristics, so barriers to entry, supplier power, buyer power. This pestle analysis looks at macro level conditions. So what's the economy doing? What's the technological advancements? What role do regulation play? And then once you look at the opportunities and threats, you look internally to your strengths and weaknesses. What resources that you have, where do you offer value along the value or supply chain? What are your core competencies? And if you put those 2 things together, if you're matching opportunities and strengths, then you can develop strategies, right? Again, very general things as guiding principles for addressing certain strategic decisions. Are you a differentiator? Are you a Starbucks? Do you charge a premium price, but people expect more things from you? What's your level of diversification? Always a huge question for companies that are growing. Should we acquire this firm? Should we do it ourselves? Should we have a joint venture, which can be speedier and easier to unwind, but also you have to share resources. So again, trade-offs come into play on how you implement these strategies, right? And again, the overarching theme of all these different modules or dimensions of the program that I offer is that all strategic decisions are risky and probabilistic, and they all have trade-offs. So a notion of doing these programs is to hear your wisdom, to hear your experiences, and to see what sort of things can we put in place to, 1, recognize the trade-offs, and to 2, not allow ourselves to be susceptible to some of the biases that creep into daily work life simply because we're humans. So this idea of groupthink, confirmation bias, being the proverbial yes man or woman, fighting against the status quo, and things of that nature. So again, 4 intertwined little modules, they creep up in almost all the programs that I do. So an overview of critical thinking and decision making, right? A fun way to expose the biases that we all have as human beings. This notion of dealing with negative events, corporate communications, and crisis management. Ethical decisions always play a role in that module. And then a more day-to-day approach to strategic decision-making in dealing with some classic strategic questions like new ventures, mergers, acquisitions, and alliances. And then an example here of Kodak and how it's been susceptible to certain biases. So Jason, you can just click through all of these if you wish. So Kodak developed the first digital camera in '75. It invested billions, but delayed its release for decades. This idea of sunk cost bias or confirmation bias. It's filmless photography, but don't tell anyone. Afraid it would cannibalize 90% of the market. Bankruptcy in 2012. Again, this is the innovator's dilemma in a way. They wanted to keep doing what they were doing, right? And they couldn't really see over their shoulder and predict these things. But it also exposed the sunk costs that were at play. The coronavirus, and talking with a lot of executives, has really been an endogenous or technological shock. Firms are doing things out of necessity that they have put off before, and they're doing them now because they've had the opportunity to do it. And the next slide, I always bring in topical examples. Some recent decisions. JCPenney dropped coupons. Netflix in its constant evolution, started out as sending us CDs in the mail. Now they are the leader in original programming, and every year we forecast Netflix demise. We wait for the big content providers to come after them, and now they are. Amazon has some great examples. We talk about why Amazon bought Whole Foods. I don't think they bought Whole Foods for the grocery store. I think they bought Whole Foods for the last mile, right? And now Amazon, one of Amazon's major competitors, which people used to laugh when we talked about it, is Walmart. because Walmart has what Amazon wants, and that's storage and last mile capability. And so now Amazon is buying up strip malls and things, and movie theaters for pennies on the dollar because of the pandemic and and the recessionary environment that we were in. And so Amazon is continuing to make these moves, not because per se they want Whole Foods or they want the strip mall with a defunct Sears or Belk in it. It's because they want that opportunity for last mile delivery. That's a big challenge for them. And then finally, we get into different governance mechanisms, and I want to have time for your questions. And so we'll talk about board of directors, the role that they play, different external controls. Jason, you can go to the next slide. And we always populate our conversations. This is very discussion based with different vignettes. So for example, when I did some work with the Georgia Department of Revenue, we talked about the hiring practice, the pros and cons of an external hire, and also this idea of pros and cons of a merger. Always, again, can be sold for synergies, but synergies aren't always there. You can overpay for a merger and things of that nature. So these are some of the things that we do to contextualize the topics that we talk about. So that's it for me. I'm here to answer any questions that you have or listen to any comments. Again, these 4 things flow together very well, I think. We don't necessarily do all of these things in all of our programming, but we have the ability to segue, depending on the company that we're working with, to talk about these different topics.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Let me see if I can get myself back online here. That was
We did great. Thanks, Jake.
I was trying to drive there. Yeah, no, that was an excellent discussion. Just kind of a follow-up, and I'm looking to see here while we're talking if we've got any
Sure.
questions in the audience. I don't see anything just yet, but to give folks a moment.
Of course.
Can you tell us just a little, excuse me, maybe a little bit more about the target audience for this program, and who do you think would be sort of the best or could benefit maybe the most?
Right. So I think, in my experience, long-time experience with executive education, I think your group has done an excellent job reaching out to corporate Atlanta, right? And so we do a lot of work with specific companies, right? And we tailor make our programs to address specific issues that they have associated with this. And so often we have middle to senior level managers come in to do this. And then often we have specific groups within the organization, right? It could be the logistics group, or it could be the corporate strategy group, where we bring these topics to the table, and then we have discussions with the leaders of these groups on how best to tailor the programs to talk about their specific needs, right? And so in a recent one that we just did, we talked a lot about the role that this company should have in dealing with social issues, right? And so my job, as I often say and humbly say, is to be organized and direct the discussions around these specific topics. And so we spent a lot of time with a recent group talking about the role that the company should have in dealing with sustainability, right? And being should they be proactive in sustainability or more reactive and wait and see what their competitors are doing? How should they handle social issues both within the company and in external messaging to their stakeholders? Naturally, because of the pandemic, if we consider that a crisis of some sort, I've spent a lot of time recently talking about the role of leadership when shocks like this happen, things as humans that we expect out of leaders, empathy, communication. Whereas when these sort of victim crises happen, we give them a little bit more leeway to make mistakes as long as we feel that they're being open and transparent with us. And then this notion of innovation in a pandemic, right? I'm not trying to paint too silver of a lining on the challenges that we faced, but I've heard a lot from our clients about how, oh yeah, we did this. We thought about this for 4 years and we finally said we're going to go for it. The value of virtual work, right? The trade-offs of virtual work. And so we spent a lot of time discussing these things.
Awesome. Yeah, it's certainly timely right now. These are some really pressing issues that are out there, and folks are really watching, how companies respond, and internally and externally.
Right.
Your employees are too, looking to see what you're going to say and do. So yeah, great points there, Mike. Still, it looks like no questions from the audience right now, so I'm gonna
Okay.
wrap things up here,
Sure.
unless you've got anything else you want to add.
No,
Um,
I want to thank everyone for joining today. Jason, I want to thank you and Gary for hosting, and appreciate all the hard work that the executive education team does. Again, to reiterate the audience, many of the folks in our professional and executive MBA programs are the clientele. So middle and senior level managers that some decide to get the MBA, they bring this sort of information back to their groups, their teams, their top management team, and we're able to deliver this same sort of content, in a day or week long program. So there's great synergies there in terms of who our customers and clients are, and of course the sort of content that we do. And we're always willing, as we alluded to work with the individual organizations to tailor make and highlight those key things that you want to do, not just with my program, but with our portfolio of programs that we offer.
yeah, that's an excellent point to close on. I mean, just the few months or 6 months I've been here with the team now, I've just been amazed at the breadth of knowledge here at the Terry College of Business, and literally there's not a topic we can't address with companies. So
Right.
it's a pretty awesome place to be. So, but we appreciate that. So for anyone that's interested, this particular course on strategic decision making and crisis management, we will run an open enrollment course for individuals, or you can take as a group with your company.
Right.
Coming up in October 4th through the 8th, I believe. And as I mentioned before, that will include, you'll have access to our e-learning portal, so you'll have access to the work where you can take some of the modules between the live virtual sessions, and there'll be 3 live virtual sessions scheduled with Dr. Farr here that will kind of guide you through the course as well. And that's again, it's October 4th through the 8th. Registration's open now if anyone's interested. Best place to kind of see the details and get more information would be our website. It's at terry.uga.edu/executive.
Great.
And of course, you can follow us or drop questions in the chat here, even after this is wrapped up, and we can get back to you here.
Absolutely.
Looks like I did just get a question.
Oh, good.
Here they come. All right.
and to reiterate what Jason said, folks, is that whereas we do tailor make programs to individual companies, we do have what we call open enrollment. So if this is something that you're interested in as an individual, I can do this, technically I could do this virtually, which has been, again, a bit of an eye-opening even for us that, these things can go this way over a week, or we can have you out to our great offices in Atlanta as a group. So don't feel like you have to be, that your organization itself has to do it, right? It means this idea of open enrollment is you can sign up as an individual, and then we commingle the group and talk about these things, and you still bring your expertise and your experiences to the fore.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, even though we are doing some in-person programs now too.
Yes.
So
yes,
we're certainly flexible there. So I don't know, Mike. I don't know if you can see the questions in the comment section here, but
here we go.
Yeah.
Good.
We've got I work in the security and risk mitigation sector, and it's hard to explain clients how much money they can save just by having a crisis management plan. How can you sell these plans to clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. Doing a lot of work on corporate reputation, sometimes these things are hard to quantify, and so this might not be the best answer. I don't have a specific example of how you can show them how much money they'll save. In a pinch, I would flip it around. I would say, hey, you weren't prepared. This turned into a disaster, right? Meaning that you lost a lot of financial and reputational capital by not being prepared. And I think that would sink in with folks. Like, had you had a plan, then A would not have happened, or was be less likely to happen. B would not have happened. And so I don't see much quantification on now. It's likely out there, but I haven't seen much quantification on, hey, if you have this plan, you will save X amount of dollars, because that's contingent on something bad happening. But if the flip side is that if you were ill prepared to handle a crisis and you can see the damage that it did, the sell is, had you had a plan, you could have been A, more responsive. You too could have had, depending on what the crisis is, had people in place to deal with this immediately instead of scrambling around. And I think that'll resonate with people. So I hope that's at least a start to answering that question.
Okay. And it looks like this is a follow-up, I think, to that.
Yeah.
How can you explain clients how much money they can save by just having plans and guidelines to confront the crisis? So yeah. That looks like it.
Great question.
That was a fantastic question. So great,
yeah.
Great way to close out. So again, thanks everybody for joining us today. We're gonna we'll do another one of these in a couple of weeks, September 29th. We're going to talk about cybersecurity with Dr. Dave Chatterjee. So that's going to be a great one as well. And we hope y'all can join us again. And again, remember just to follow us here on LinkedIn if you want updates on our programs and of course when we offer these talks as well. And we certainly welcome your feedback, suggestions, or questions following this. So just let us know. And until next time, be safe and be well, everybody. And thanks again. And thank you.
Thanks to everyone who joined us. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, Exec Education team, for all your hard work. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you.